Get ready, because today we're going to talk about how to critique other writers' work and also how to apply the feedback that you receive. By the way, my name is Brandon McNulty. I'm the author of Bad Parts, also the author of Entry Wounds, and welcome to my writing channel. One of the things I often talk about on this channel is the importance of getting your work critiqued by other writers. Now, despite the fact that I always talk about this, I've never actually devoted a video to it, so today I thought we'd talk about it, and I have 5 tips for you today on how to get the most out of critiques, whether you're giving them or receiving them. Now, just so we're all on the same page, when I'm talking about critiques, I'm talking about when a writer finishes writing a story, a book, whatever it may be, and then they give that story to another writer in hopes of receiving feedback. This is a very important thing because you need that feedback. You need to know what's working in your story as well as what isn't working. Now, with that said, first tip for today is to establish what type of feedback is needed. This is something that often gets overlooked. I think a lot of times when writers hand out their stories to other people, they often say things like, let me know what you think of this. Is it good? Is it bad? What's going on here? But that's not enough. I think anytime you go into critiquing a story or you hand out your story to someone else, you need to know what kind of feedback is expected. And keep in mind things like, we don't know, okay, is this the first time this book has ever seen the light of day, the first time anyone has looked at it, or is it near the ending stages? Is the writer ready to send this off for publication? Because that'll determine different things. If you just finish the book and you send it out to someone for the first time, you're probably going to be open to large-scale changes. But on the other hand, if you've already gone through this story many times, maybe you already received critiques in the past, then it might be the time to just focus in on fine-tuning things. Another thing to keep in mind is that the reader can provide a stronger critique if they know what to look for specifically. For instance, if the writer is concerned about one element of the story, they can tell the reader, hey, can you please take a look at the dialogue? I'm concerned that it doesn't sound natural enough. Tip number 2 is to point out specific strengths and weaknesses in the story. One of the worst things you can do if you're critiquing someone else's work is to say to them, hey, I read your story, it was great, I enjoyed it. There was like one spot in the middle where I was a little bored for maybe a page or two, but other than that, it was fantastic. Best of luck with it. That doesn't help anyone. That's vague advice. You need to be more specific. You need to focus in on what's working in the story and also what needs improvement. And you could say to the writer, you could say to them, for instance, maybe something like, hey, I just read your story. It was great. I really loved the characters. I thought that the way they interacted with one another, it was fantastic. I thought there was great balance among the cast. Now, that being said, I wanted more out of the plot. I think it was just too predictable. I think it was too straightforward. And toward the middle, I wasn't feeling it anymore. Do you think you can maybe spice up the plot a little bit, maybe include a plot twist or something like that to keep me engaged? Tip number 3 is to deliver a praise sandwich. What this is, it's when you open up a critique by saying something nice about the story you're critiquing. You praise the writer's ability in some way or another, and then you get into the bad news. You deliver the harsh critiques, you tell them what's wrong with the story, what needs fixing, what can be improved. And then at the very end, you wrap things up by saying other nice things about this story, and you try to build off the critiques in a positive way. You give them hope that their story can be improved if they work at it. And if you do this, you will keep the writer's ego up there, you'll keep them from feeling bad about themselves, and you'll also give them the strength to move on and make the necessary changes. Tip number 4 is to be honest when you critique someone else's work. You have to remember that when someone submits their work in hopes of getting feedback, they need to receive hard, critical feedback. This is not the time to pull punches. This is not the time to be soft and just, pet their ego for a while. You have to be honest with people. You have to help them address the problems that they're having as a writer or having with this particular story. If you don't tell the writer what they're doing wrong, you're basically enabling them to continue making those mistakes down the line. Nobody wants to hear that their story sucks. Nobody wants to hear that any part of their story sucks. But if there is something wrong with the story, you need to point it out so that writers can grow as they continue on with their journey. And tip number 5 is for you when you're the recipient of feedback, and it's that you need to decide which feedback will improve your story. Now, how do you do that? That's the big question. If you get feedback on your story and somebody says, well, I didn't like this area of the story or this particular thing, it wasn't working for me, what do you do? How do you know which feedback is worth applying to your story, and how do you know which feedback can just get thrown to the curb? First of all, you need to send your story out to more than one person. You have to send it to multiple people. And when you do this, you will get multiple viewpoints on your story. For instance, if you sent me something, I might read your story and I might say, well, you know what, the pacing here is too slow. Now, keep in mind, that's my own personal opinion, and I'm a guy who likes fast-paced stories. So if I say it's too slow, maybe it is too slow, or maybe it's just a Brandon problem. Now, if you sent your story to 4 or 5 other people and none of them had a problem with the pacing, you could probably just write it off as a Brandon problem and you can move on and you can just continue your story at the pace it was going. Now, on the other hand, if I say your pacing is too slow and 4 or 5 other people agree with me and they say, yeah, hey, this story is moving way too slow, you need to speed things up, then you got to consider ramping up the pacing in your story. It's the only way you're going to fix the problem. Whenever multiple people are agreeing on a certain problem in your story, that means that it's something worth looking at. And another thing to keep in mind is that if someone points out a logical problem with your story, you need to address that issue. Even if just one person notices some kind of logical issue in your story, you're going to want to address that. So, for instance, if you have a character in chapter 10, maybe they're driving around in a Jeep that you said was totaled back in chapter 5, you need to address that issue. So keep those things in mind. Logic is your friend, and of course, if you do have multiple people pointing out the same issue in your story, those are the kind of issues you want to address. So I hope this helps. Question of the day: what is the harshest piece of feedback you have ever received on one of your stories? Let us know in the comments section below. Thank you guys for watching. If you want to support the channel, please pick up a copy of either one of my books. Bad Parts is great if you like small town horror. It's about people trading away their sick and injured body parts in order to get healthy again. And then Entry Wounds is great if you like thrillers. It's about a guy who picks up a haunted gun and he can't put it down until he kills 6 people with it. Also, be sure to check out my other videos, hit the like and subscribe buttons for me, share this video with a friend, and as always, remember to keep on writing.